Good evening, everyone. I'm very glad to be here, and I look forward to a rollicking debate. In January, 10 days before the Saudi king Abdullah died, a woman from Burma was dragged to a public square in Mecca, the holiest site for Muslims. She was held down by 4 Saudi policemen as she screamed, "I did not kill, I did not kill," after which an executioner took 3 blows to behead her. This woman at the time was just the 10th person to be executed in Saudi Arabia. But now, under the reign of King Salman, that number is up to 88. And that number outnumbers the number of people that Saudi Arabia executed last year. Now, Saudi Arabia is in an illustrious company, including that of the United States, of course, because along with 3 other countries, they're in the top 5 of the countries that execute people. Now, I oppose the death penalty everywhere, but especially in a country like Saudi Arabia, where human rights groups have long documented the injustice under which people are beheaded. Most of the people who've been executed in Saudi Arabia this year have been either Saudis or people from poor countries such as Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and other developing countries. Human rights groups have made it very clear that the so-called trials after which these people are beheaded in public squares are done often with no legal representation, are often conducted in Arabic, a language that most of the people on trial do not understand, and often those people are forced to sign confessions, again in Arabic, that they don't understand. You often hear the Saudi royal family use the term exceptionalism, that Saudi Arabia is different than other countries, and that the Saudi royal family will help the people develop and progress because of this exceptional atmosphere. In reality, it's the Saudi royal family that is exceptional. Exceptional in its brutality, exceptional in its dictatorship, and exceptional in its gender apartheid. I'm a proud Muslim, and the Islam that is practiced in Saudi Arabia is unlike the Islam practiced anywhere else, including my country of birth, Egypt. In Saudi Arabia, there are more women than men on university campuses. They recognize the value of knowledge. But what do women do after they get this knowledge on their campuses? What happens to them in this exceptional environment? They basically have to go home and watch men who are much less qualified than they are get jobs that they cannot have. Saudi Arabia is a country, again, I remind you, that says it's exceptional and needs to develop slowly. If it was so exceptional, why are all those activists that you rarely hear about out there fighting to prove that they are ready for freedom? Have you heard of Raif Badawi, a blogger who was sentenced to 10 years in jail and 1,000 lashes? His crime, he set up a website for Saudi liberals and dared to question the version of Islam that the Saudi royal family promotes as the true Islam. This is Saudi Arabia, and you will know in this country what it is that keeps the West in bed with the Saudi regime. It is basically money, oil, and weapons. This country has a long history of selling weapons to the Saudis, and you will remember the Al Yamama scandal in which BAE sold billions of pounds of weapons to Saudi Arabia that enriched arms manufacturers in this country and enriched Saudi princes in one of the biggest corruption scandals that was broken by the UK media here. Canada, a country that often likes to boast has a progressive record, whether it comes to women's rights or human rights generally, is currently embroiled in its own weapons scandal because although the Canadian government policy forbids the government from selling weapons to countries that violate human rights, the Canadian government just brokered a deal worth $15 million to sell armored personnel carriers to Saudi Arabia. Who do you think the Saudis use those weapons against? When they're not bombing Yemeni civilians, they're using those weapons against their own population. Again, those peaceful activists who are trying to be free and to give the lie to this idea that the Saudi Arabian experience of dictatorship is somehow exceptional. So, weapons deals, oil, and the hypocrisy of the West, a story that you hear over and over, and yet the West refuses to get out of bed with the Saudi royal family. Perhaps it's ironic, but it speaks volumes to that hypocrisy, that the truest thing said about the Saudis from the US administration was in a fictional show called West Wing, which many of you might have seen. You might remember C.J. Craig, the White House spokesperson, who pushed to give a comment about the burning to death of those schoolgirls. At first said, I don't have anything to say, and pushed to comment again. She was asked, are you outraged? She listed a whole list of crimes that the Saudi regime commits, but she very honestly wrapped it up, as I will now wrap it up, by saying, Saudi Arabia are partners in peace. Fully recognizing that hypocrisy. I would add to that, Saudi Arabia, the partner of the West in peace, hypocrisy, and blood money. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I started working for the U.S. Department of State back in 1990, at a high point in U.S.-Saudi and Western Saudi relations, when our militaries came together to liberate Kuwait after Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded. After 25 years, including multiple assignments in U.S. embassies across the Middle East and working in both Democratic and Republican White Houses, I have come to believe it imperative for the West to get out of bed with the House of Saud. I take this position because it is delusional to think that the security and financial benefits of collaborating with the Saudis serve Western interests. Instead, the so-called security and financial benefits of collaborating with Saudi Arabia need to be seen for what they are: dangerous enablers of a deeply self-damaging Western strategy toward the Middle East, a strategy largely responsible for the dramatic decline in America's international standing since the end of the Cold War and at an even faster clip since 9/11. Perpetuated long enough, this strategy will destroy America's status as a great power, dragging the West down with it. First, some argue that Saudi collaboration has been and remains essential to projecting Western, especially U.S., power in the Middle East. But this willfully overlooks how such power projection actually works to destabilize the Middle East and undermine Western interests. An extremely pernicious example of this dates back to July 1979, when the Carter administration joined with Saudi Arabia to arm, fund, and train jihadi militants in Afghanistan before the Soviet invasion. Many of these same jihadi militants turned their venom on the West, killing thousands on 9/11. Nevertheless, the West repeatedly succumbs to this day to the temptation of collaborating with Saudi Arabia to empower ever more jihadi militants in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, against actors the West doesn't like. Each time, the West tells itself it derives short-term benefit from harming our designated adversary. Given this record, any claim that Saudi Arabia is now a partner in fighting jihadi groups is absurd. These groups literally would not exist but for Saudi Arabia, and it will not be the Saudis who help us defeat them. Another pernicious form of Saudi-enabled Western power projection is Saudi support for the deployment of hundreds of thousands of U.S. and Western troops to the Middle East over the past quarter century. The vast majority of Muslim publics in the Middle East now overwhelmingly see America and its partners as the biggest threat to their security and welfare. This is clearly a losing proposition for the West. Some argue that Saudi collaboration is essential to roll back Iran's rising regional influence. Again, it is delusional to think that that actually will advance Western interests. In reality, Western collaboration with Saudi Arabia against Iran is fueling potentially genocidal, mainly anti-Shia violence in the Middle East. At this point, the West cannot achieve any of its stated goals in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, on terrorism, on proliferation, on energy security, without productive, full-range relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Some argue that Saudi collaboration is essential to secure stable oil flows from the Persian Gulf to international energy markets. The oil market also rests on an assumption that the House of Saud will remain stably in power indefinitely. While some tout the smooth succession from Saudi King Abdullah to King Salman earlier this year, in fact, Salman and his coterie have changed the upper levels of Saudi political leadership more radically than at any point in Saudi history. By doing so, they have created dangerously high risks of intra-family conflict, conflict that is likely to lead to the fragmentation of the Saudi state, with devastating consequences for stability on the Arabian Peninsula. It is imperative that the West not wait for popular revolution in Saudi Arabia with all the economic chaos and calamity that would come with it. At this juncture, the West's position in the Middle East is in free fall. Staying in bed with the House of Saud only guarantees the West's irrevocable strategic failure in the Middle East and around the world. Thank you.